You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. All right, welcome into today's episode. This is one I've been looking forward to, one that we've kind of bounced in and off the schedule, but we're finally here. So Jen Cohen, the athletic director at the University of Washington. Jen, thanks for joining me.
Hey, I'm really excited to be with you today.
Glad to have you here, and we've got several things we're going to talk about, as I mentioned offline. And, as I was doing my background research, one of the things that popped up on a couple different places in news articles and even a live interview I'd seen with you at one point when you first got the job, there was a reference back to this, your long history and of love and support of the University of Washington and following the Huskies even as a young child and maybe having some communication with Don James, the legendary coach at Washington, about your future and how you might want to engage with Washington. And I think that is a neat story. And I was wondering if we could just come off the top with talking about that.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I do feel so fortunate, to be able to serve and lead at a school that I've loved since I was a little girl. I mean, my passion for college athletics really started with my passion for college football and specifically Husky football. So yeah, I started going to games in second grade. We moved from San Diego to Tacoma, Washington, and didn't have any ties to the region. And so my dad started bringing our family to games, and it was just absolutely love at first sight for me. And I fell in love with the competition and the community and even, just the relationships too, like you're able to establish, like for me and my dad, Husky football was kind of our common thread and still is. So yeah, I just, I didn't see any boundaries with my role with Husky football. I started writing letters to not just Coach James, but Coach Skip Hall, who was the recruiting coordinator at the time, and had pen pal relationships with those guys, giving them tips, things that are really annoying now in the AD chair that you get. I did. And I really genuinely believed when I was a little girl that I was going to coach football at UW. And that was my dream. And Coach James politely told me that probably back then, that was what, I don't want to date myself here because, I'm still like 25, Mike. But he told me that, girls really weren't getting a lot of opportunities coaching Division I college football, but I should think about a career in college sports because there were more women getting into it. And so I set a goal at a very young age to set out to do this. I had no idea what I was doing and no idea what an athletic director really did at the time. But yeah, I'm living a childhood dream that certainly isn't as storybook as it sounds. Been a lot of hard challenges and ups and downs and roller coaster rides in this thing. But, it's crazy because when Coach James, first of all, I was able to plan Coach James's memorial service, and then erect a statue in front of Husky Stadium in my first year as the director of athletics. I mean, how surreal is that? I mean, pretty crazy to be able to have a career like this. So I'm very grateful to the university.
That's pretty special. I'm interested when you were thinking back to that time and you were saying, hey, you want to be a football coach. Were you engaged in like recreational league football or like Joan Cronin is a good friend of mine, right? We worked together at Tennessee and she tells a story about actually wanting to play Little League baseball as a 12-year-old and how she was just told, no, this can't happen. You're not allowed to do it. There's not a place for you. But she had a love of sport. And you've mentioned already you alluded to your dad's love of football and his engagement and bringing you to Husky games. Was it just that inspired the desire?
Yeah, I mean, I did love sports too. So no, I didn't play football because back in the day, the only girls that played football were, the whole powder puff thing. I don't even know if you're allowed to say that anymore. It's probably not correct to even say it, but most of the women that did that were actually cheerleaders that weren't playing any other sport. So my dad was actually a baseball player. He played college baseball in LA. He was drafted. So growing up, I played softball. I'll never forget, it was kind of post Title IX. So our dads coached us in softball when we were little girls. It was so fun. And then I love volleyball. I still love volleyball. I played volleyball through high school. I coached volleyball at a small college when I was in graduate school. So competition I love competition. I love team competition. I like individual growth. And so sports have always played an important role in my life. I just think, I always just thought it'd be awesome to play football. And like, I think my son, my youngest son is a football player at a really great program here at O'Day High School in Seattle. And of all the sports my kids have played, I just think it's the coolest team sport that I've seen them compete in.
That's great. You mentioned a moment ago just the School of Hard Knocks, right? You're the athletic director at the University of Washington today, but everybody has to start somewhere. You have to get out of the gate, and for many, it's not this glorious unveiling right out of the gate, right? You're struggling and you're figuring out a way, and you don't know what the end game is going to necessarily be. You have visualization of what that might be, but you alluded to the fact that you coached volleyball in grad school, and then I know that you at some point early on in your career, you decided to actually move and go to Lubbock, Texas, and take an internship. And those were formative years in terms of becoming who you eventually became. And those were hard days, right? So maybe a little bit of the learning from that time there as you were launching your career.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about all that. First of all, I mean, it's always going to be hard. So
Yeah,
before we go to the past, I mean, even when you arrive, there's a whole nother set of challenges and learning and growth. And I think that's probably the biggest message I always have with folks that are interested in aspiring to be in a job like this is like, don't think you're going to arrive and it gets easier. It gets more uncomfortable the more responsibility you have, and it gets more challenging, which is like awesome, because I think the more you have throughout your career of that kind of adversity and twists and turns and ups and downs and all arounds, the better prepared you are for a position like this. So yeah, my upbringing and my background isn't similar to a lot of athletic directors, in that I didn't start off at a big time Division I school. I started off in what was NAIA that transitioned to Division III athletics. So grad school, volleyball coach, driving a van, sleeping on church floors, like absolutely no budgets, to my first job, University of Puget Sound, that had transitioned to Division III, where I was, sweeping floors and fixing shot clocks on ladders, to at 28 with a master's and already have been working for a few years, being the recipient of the Janine McCaney Endowed Internship at Texas Tech, set up by a trailblazing woman who had passed away. And in her will, she had an endowment set up for a woman aspiring to be an athletic director. So I moved to Lubbock, Texas, sight unseen, for $1,000 a month in a cockroach infested apartment, to get my break into Division I athletics, and it was still one of my best years of my life. So yeah, I mean, there's no perfect way to get there. And then, mine's unique too. I got to stay at the same school this whole time. I've been at
right.
Washington for 24 years. I also left athletics. I did academic fundraising for a few years. I spent the majority of my time here thinking I didn't know if I wanted to be an athletic director anymore, versus like thinking I was on some path to get there. And so I think that's important to share. I think people think there's just one way to get there, and I think there's an only way to get there. It's not cookie cutter, really has to be authentic to you.
Yeah. So I share a similar background in development, and I have some very specific thoughts about the things that you have to be aware of and let's call it good at to be successful in development. And there's been a run for a while where a lot of folks came out of the external revenue side getting AD jobs. And I think now it's sort of leveled out into a lot of different pathways as you referenced. But in particular for you, and you reflect back on your time at Washington in fundraising and in development. And candidly, Jen, I think I was telling some folks at NACTA, when I was first in development and I came to NACTA and NAD and all those things, the rooms look very different today. Thank God. I mean, there's more diversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, et cetera. And you really were sort of on the front end of that in many ways in terms of a leadership role in development in college athletics. What are the things that you look to and say, these were really formative moments in my development career that led to me being the kind of leader I've become as an athletic director?
Yeah. So first of all, I love fundraising. I still do. And I think what's so beneficial about fundraising is that I learned pretty early on, it's a very humbling role. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about fundraising. I don't know about you, but people probably always say to you like, "Oh, I could never fundraise. I'm not outgoing enough," or I can't fundraise. I'm not charismatic enough. And it's like fundraising actually has nothing to do with those things. Like
Right.
I think about fundraising as it parallels to leadership in that it has nothing to do with you and it has everything to do with you. Like you have to be able to like really like put somebody almost in a one-way relationship where it's really only about them, right? And they're getting the outcomes that they want, but you have to match them up with something bigger than themselves. And so it's a very selfless role, and I think the best, at least for me, like where I thought that I learned a lot was like that it wasn't a relationship, it wasn't friend raising, it wasn't a relationship with me, it was a relationship with something bigger than me, and that my job was to really steward the whole and find ways for people to be connected to the whole. And it was all about alignment. And so, I mean, I just could go through so many different examples of dealing with people and understanding what motivates people and connecting them to their passions, or screwing that up and not connecting them with their
Yeah.
passions, or not relating well to what they were really wanting and needing, and translating that into other parts of the role. So when I became a sport administrator, I took baseball first and then I got football. The skills were all the same. Problems
Yeah.
way different, right? Student athlete issues, like managing coaches, all that internal work that when you're on the revenue side you don't know about until you're in the chair. But the way that you solve problems, and the way you connect with people, and the way you care about understanding what they are about to get the outcome that you need for the greater good, that's all trained and learned in development. So
Yeah.
I rely on my fundraising skill. I still raise a lot of money here too, but I still rely on those principles as it relates to just leading.
Yeah, to your point, I remember one of the first athletic director job interviews I had at the time, and I had a very open relationship with my athletic director, Doug Dickey, and he was a champion for me, and he knew I was interviewing, and I went and I interviewed, and I came back, and the response from the president that I was talking to, he said, "Hey, you don't have sports administration experience. You've got a lot of fundraising experience or whatever." But my athletic director at the time, he basically called BS on that and said, "Hey, look, yes, you don't have direct sports administration experience, but the skill sets that are inherent in success and development clearly cross those boundaries into being able to be successful in sports administration because it's about the relationship, as you allude to." Now, you have a lot of things you have to learn, right? And to his credit, he gave me then sports administration experience by giving me some sports. But I think you're on point with the ability to communicate, build relationships, understand others, hold hands and walk with others in partnership. That kind of things are all really important tools to being successful ultimately. And as you know, as an athletic director, you know this for sure now with the time that you've been in the chair, you have to become more of a generalist at the end of the day, right?
You do. I also think, development really taught me to have much tougher skin.
Yeah.
I think that you get really used to the noise, criticism and different personalities, and kind of managing the external. And if you get real good at it, you learn how to manage it, still serve, but actually not let it move you in ways that you shouldn't move. And so that's been very beneficial in this job, because I think obviously these jobs are extremely noisy. Leadership in general is probably the most complicated it's ever been, just the general nature of our society and all the things that are coming our way. And there's not a lot of past history that's really, guiding us. But what I do know is that kind of focusing inside out as an organization or as an individual probably gives you your best bet to make wise decisions, and how you vet feedback, and
You're
how
right.
you vet criticism, and the skills that you need to like kind of practice what you give power to and what you don't. I think you learn a lot of that in fundraising, because it's a very humbling experience. You put a lot into those relationships, and ultimately you realize that like they're really not about you.
Yeah, yeah, and you getting some no's along the way, right? So,
Yeah.
hey, I want to dive in more on your time as athletic director, but first I want to visit um, just prior to becoming named the permanent athletic director, and that's something that we don't talk a lot about with any regularity nationally. Is this role, the interim role, right? you didn't have the interim role for a long period of time, but you had an interim role for a period of time, and that's something that different schools use, and they use it in different purposes. Sometimes it's to the test drive of the person to see if they can handle the job. Sometimes it's, hey, this is just a segue to the next person. And so I don't know that it's 50-50, but there are a number of folks who serve in interim capacities and they get the job, and then there are a number that serve in interim capacities and they don't. Obviously, if you're in the chair that you were in previous to that and they give you the opportunity to be the interim AD, you're not going to turn that opportunity down, right? But talk a little bit about sort of like where your head was during those months where, hey, the job is there, there's a potential to get the job, and the main thing is the main thing. And, for those who might be appointed in interim roles in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, interim is such an unusual place and role to be in. First of all, that feels like it was like 40 years ago. So let me refresh myself for a
Yeah.
second here. So in my case, I had a very honest and transparent conversation with our president from the very beginning about my potential candidacy. So I knew going into the interim role that I was also a candidate for the job. I also knew that it was going to be a national search. It was a wide open search, and the University of Washington, as it deserves, was going to go out and get the very best person. And so this wasn't a test run just for me. And I knew that. So I think if you're in those situations, like, try to get as much clarity and communication and honesty so that you know exactly what role you're really serving. And I remember Rick George called me. He was at the time I don't know how long he'd been at Colorado, but he's been a great champion for women in general. And he called and was like, I didn't even know him. And he's like spitting through the phone, "This is your job. And, own it like it's your job and get after it." And I mean, I cannot tell you how valuable that call was and how much it meant to me, because in particular, sometimes women, we kind of like want to like make sure we're not stepping on anybody's toes. I was getting used to being the boss. Sometimes it still feels kind of weird to me that I'm the athletic director here. Like, I still am kind of recognizing my role at times, because I don't really see myself that way. And that was a huge, huge moment for me, because in my mind, I was like, he's right. Like, I got to own this thing and just not try to prove myself, but like, don't be shy about doing what's best for Washington because you're worried about being a candidate. So I knew the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and challenges of this athletic department, and I started acting upon those things during the interim time. Um, I mean, searches are so awkward when you're an internal candidate. You're getting judged by decisions that you're making. The other candidates aren't. There's a lot of weird dynamics during that time with donors that were involved in the search, and just lots of drama, as you can imagine, that goes on in these searches, and especially when they include maybe too many people as part of that process. So, yeah, I think I was named interim maybe like end of December, early January, and I got the job in May. So, and I went through all the processes. I flew to Chicago for first round interviews for the school that I was working at in Seattle, Washington. And yeah, it was interesting. And I look back now, I would have done so many things differently through the interview process, probably not so much the job, but yeah, I think it's harder on interim candidates than it is outside candidates. Even though you have a leg up on knowledge, I do think you get evaluated differently. You need to know that if you're in that situation.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't in Louisville over these last few months to see what day to day looked like for Josh Hurd, but I was able to observe from 3 hours down the road, and I sent him a note a couple times, just the way he managed himself publicly during the times of not knowing exactly where that was going to play out. I mean, I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned during that. And
I think don't you think it's been interesting, Mike? Though I do think I've noticed that there's been more internal. It seems like there's been a little bit more internal promotion in that regard, and I think that's like, I think that's good too. I don't think every time that's right for a university, but I also appreciate when it is that presidents, have the openness and courage to do that versus thinking they always have to start over with somebody else. I think, especially now with what the environment we're in, the landscape changing, the volatility of that, kind of knowing who you have and what they're about and fit probably matters more than resume.
Spot on. I mean, the volatility of today's marketplace. If you have someone that you believe that you trust in, that you believe can move forward, and from a leadership standpoint, just mitigating the risk becomes an important part of the decision for sure.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I want to come back to leadership style in this moment. But first, I want to talk about this notion of what Rick said to you. This is the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Uh, the unfortunate circumstances, I can sit here and very quickly name the women that are in Power 5 AD roles. It's you, Desiree, Carla, Sandy just left the position, Heather, I'm missing Candace, and I think that's
And
probably it.
Nina. And
Yeah,
Nina.
and Nina. That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
so that's too short of a list, Jen, particularly based on the capabilities. And I know there are many more women that are being named as athletic directors in different divisions and in the the non-autonomy conferences, and so there's progress being made. But talk to me. I'm not going to ask you so much about that as I am going to ask about how do you view your role, or do you view your role as also being sort of a mentor and someone who wants to help bring those along who have the potential? Do you feel extra pressure because of that? I guess is where I'm going with the question.
Oh, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I've talked a lot about this publicly that, my gender wasn't necessarily something I thought a lot about throughout my entire career. And I really, because I thought of whatever my challenges were, I thought of them as bigger or broader or different than, or not just associated with gender. And so I was overcoming other issues and challenges. So it wasn't something that I thought as much about, and most certainly experience and recognize the way I was treated differently because of being a woman, but I just didn't give a lot of time or energy to it. And then I got this job, and it was literally like overnight, I felt this massive amount of responsibility and sure, a little bit of pressure just because that people are only seeing you as a female athletic director versus just a leader and an athletic director. And so, when people are looking at you that way and observing you that way, that the spotlight's on more. And if you fail or make mistakes, that it's going to be identified with your gender, not with the fact that leaders just fail and make mistakes sometimes. And so, yeah, and I just, I think about it every day, like just making sure I want to see more people have access to jobs like this. And so there is a level of that you feel responsible to. As far as mentorship goes, I've always been that way. I had doors closed on me and I had doors open for me, and I've always wanted to pay it forward with the doors open. So I have a very strong staff. I have a lot of women on my staff, but I mentor everybody. It's not just about the women. It's about, my passion is the development of people and people getting to show up and their whole selves to be their best selves, and creating environments that support that. And so, of course, I'm going to want to see more women get the chance at the chair and in these roles. So, but I think we have a long ways to go still. I have to tell you, like, I think that there's just this natural tendency, in a lot of, not just within university cultures, but within the media and within the fan bases and with donors. And it's still so strongly there that somehow women just are not as comfortable for people to lead, in particular in sports, and in particular it seems like college sports, because the pro sports have evolved a lot in general in all areas of DEI, but college seems a little slow to the party.
Yeah, and the interesting thing on that is, there are a lot of women that they're taking critical leadership roles across campuses on the academic side across America, right? And so I'm a big fan of Patty Phillips, personally and professionally, and women leaders. Tell me the role that you see that organization evolving and filling now as it grows.
Yeah, I mean, Patty's just done an unbelievable job of focusing on leadership development. I think that's what Women Leaders does, unlike any other organization. I mean, I remember back in the day before it was, rebranded and everything, it was more like a conference you would go to and maybe learn about some things. I mean, she's completely changed and transformed the programming and the services that are available to women, because I think at the end of the day, this is so much less about our ability just to be good in the current roles that we're in. It's more actually about evolving ourselves holistically as leaders and building the confidence, because ultimately confidence building is like the single most important thing, for people. She's done that through a variety of different platforms and programs, and she's evolved the organization to evolve with the times, generationally as it relates to DEI and other areas. So I actually was just with her and other female athletic directors at D1 Next, which is an event she does just for athletic directors to come together. So we were just in Miami together, and I left just feeling like you're not alone, and I think that's important. I think especially in these jobs, we all need to have community built around us. So huge admiration for her, what she stands for, and what she's trying to do.
Let's talk a little bit more about leadership. So I had an athletic director. I won't give the exact time frame or the school, but I was talking to this person some time ago, and they were talking about what would they do next if they were not in this role. And they were a lifer in college athletics, and they were saying, "I'm not sure what I would do next." And I said, "Well, you would be amazed and shocked at the things you could do next, because if you think about it, you're financially speaking, you're running departments that have significant budgets, 8-9 figure budgets. You have legislative exposure. You have exposure to faculty, staff, parents, season ticket holders, the media, on and on and on and on. All these different constituent groups, all of whom have a variety of different needs and desires and goals. Most typically, none of them match. Right? They're all over the board, and so, as a leader, you have to find a place in the middle of that and lead the way that you're capable of leading, the way you want to lead. And the skill set to be an athletic director in today's world is simply amazing. How do you lead? What's your leadership style? What are the tenets for success and leadership for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think, by the way, you're so right. I mean, this job is all about alignment of a bunch of stakeholders that are constantly in conflict with each other. So, I mean, the first principle for me is about creating clarity and purpose, for others and for the organization. And that has to be authentic and true to me, as the leader. So everybody wants to be part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
Everybody. And so it takes a lot of focus and responsibility and actual courage, I think, especially in the environment that we're in with all those stakeholders that aren't all aligned, to kind of have some sort of vision that can rally everybody and hold true to that, and have everybody within your organization, see what that is, and most important, see, absolutely how they contribute to it. I think as a leader, I recognize myself as the biggest culture builder. Like there's nobody. I think culture is can be inspired and supported by all, but I do think leaders own the culture and have to set the culture. And so, I really spend a lot of time, trying to practice what I preach, practice the values, apply them in decision making and hiring, firing, how we budget, but having some level of commitment to that every single day. I think consistency is really important, in leadership, like showing up, being all in, being committed, at all times, and like trying to stay consistent, in that space, especially now when things are so up and down, all the time in the environment, and just kind of constantly being there. And then, for me, I think a lot of it too is just looking at my own self-awareness. I think that like leaders oftentimes just only think about their ability to influence others, which is, leadership is traditional leadership is the influence of others. But a lot of my principles and leadership center around my own self-awareness.
Yeah.
And my own responsibility to self, and my own growth, and my own ownership of where I'm struggling or not struggling. All right, this is a longer story, but like when I was younger, and like if you look at my story and my history, I mean, I pretty much had a chip on my shoulder my whole life. Like I wanted to prove everybody wrong. I got waitlisted at UW after growing up loving this place. So my job in life was to tell and prove to everybody else that they were wrong about me.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until I got into this job that I realized that that was a very unhealthy baseline to be operating off of, that I had a massive level of responsibility to others, and to be able to help others grow and build in a way that was best for the organization and putting the organization first. I had to get a better sense of my own self, and that I had to start learning how to have my own approval versus thinking about the external approvals that we're so trained to focus on. So I could talk for hours about that, but I just
Awesome.
think it's like so important, because otherwise we're constantly showing up expecting everybody else's behaviors to change, but we're not recognizing our own areas that we need to be better at. And I mean better not as in good or bad, I mean like better with ourselves.
Mm, yeah.
Like getting right with yourself. And this has been so hard for me and so much work, and I'm constantly working on it.
Well, look, the ability to work on it and get better at it is the recognition and of it, right? And the fact that you own it and can admit that that's something that we all need to work on is a first huge step towards that. Some folks just play the avoidance game,
Yeah.
but you're clearly doing that. Here's a kind of a follow up question to that. So, and we're winding it down. I want to be respectful of your time, but I got a couple more things. Um, if you think about concentric circles out from you as the leader, there's this exterior circle of the world, the Twitterverse world. Those who don't know you, they associate you as the athletic director. They don't know Jen Cohen, and their opinions are going to be all over the board. And then you start getting the circles start closing into those who know you better, and then those who are the most close to you. I think that when you get into these particular jobs, one of the things I always challenge folks on when I'm talking to them about it is this can be very lonely very quickly if you're not careful. And sometimes those are closest to you, because you are in a job with notoriety, popularity, access, it's sport, all those kind of things. Some folks will say the things they think that you want to hear, but you, as the person in the middle of this, can also be. You have to be cognizant of that to also stay true to yourself, but stay true to the goal and true to the job, right? And that's where it becomes really critical to have a circle of people who will speak truth into your life. And that means seeing the goodness in you and saying those things, and seeing the places where you need to have checks and balances, right? So how do you go about, you personally, making sure that you have that work around you, or do you?
Yeah, for sure. And amen to that, because that is so, so true. I mean, one, I've been very fortunate because of my time here that I've had access to a lot of incredible leaders that have nothing to do with college sports. And so I have mentors that I've met along the way that run businesses or used to run businesses, and have gone through, both personal and professional triumphs and failures, that I trust that I can have real relationships with, who will call me out and or share information with me, when there's a circumstance that they have, understanding about what we're talking about. I also have intentionally built support around me with like coaching. I learned that when I first got the job. I started seeing it with our head coaches. I was like, gosh, we put all this money into the kids, all this money, students this and students that. And don't get me wrong, I'm like the most student centric AD probably out there. But like, I was like, but this doesn't work unless the people are right that are serving them. So I started to build more resources around our coaches, and I have that for myself. So I've had personal coaches that I work with. I still have Coach Peterson on board as a consultant. If you want to talk about somebody that gets real with you and says it like it is, he does that for me. And so I think that's huge. I also think, though, like in closing on this, though, I think how you prioritize opinions really matters, especially in this role. And so I'm
Yeah.
always looking at, does this person have character? Does this person actually have competency? Are they consistently around this enough in some form or version of this form to actually have their opinion make sense? Because otherwise, it's like when I first had a baby and I was reading so many books about babies that I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Everybody has conflicting advice. Everybody's got a different
Yeah.
opinion. So I think you got to surround yourself, but I think you've got to do it for the right reasons, and you got to monitor it so that it doesn't become so out of control and untethered that you're making decisions that aren't really authentic to you or the place.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, this time has flown by, and so much so that I didn't even really talk about the University of Washington, Jen. But I'm sorry
All right,
about that.
stop.
But I think this. I mean, these episodes have been created to talk about contemporaneous issues in college athletics, to talk about leadership, to visit with folks who are in the chair, and everything that we've talked about here is informative to whoever's listening to this in terms of just career growth and positioning and expectations and dreams and how to handle it along the way. And when I think about, I've now done, I don't know, 50 or so of these interviews over the last year. And I think that the thing that I'm encouraged by is the fact that, we're in choppy waters in college athletics, right? But the thing I'm encouraged by is the leadership that I have seen from those who have joined me on these episodes, to see there are a variety of different ways of approaching the issues, come from a variety of different backgrounds, geographies, topographies, schools, philosophies, all that kind of thing. But I'm encouraged about what the future holds for college athletics because of the people that are in the chairs, because you've alluded to it. The leadership in the chairs are going to be the ones that carry us to these choppy waters, right? And so
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for joining me in that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I feel the same way. I mean, so many of our peers have definitely helped keep me motivated and inspired too. And no matter what happens here, right, there's so many changes. One thing we need to remember is that we still are supporting students. That has not changed. And I mean, just go out to practices and you'll be reminded that these are somebody's, sons or daughters, and that we have an accountability and responsibility to them and their experiences. And regardless of what form or fashion that's in, that is what we're responsible for. And I think we have a lot of people that are really committed to that. A lot of us that are parents ourselves that are showing up every day, caring about the environments that we're building for young people. And I hope we can keeping them at the center of our decision making moving forward.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for being with me today. It's been a joy. So
Thanks for
um,
having me.
yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. This has been From the Chair. I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Today's guest, a great conversation with the University of Washington Athletic Director Jen Cohen. We hope you'll listen to us every Wednesday across all audio podcast platforms, or you'll watch the show on YouTube every Wednesday. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.